Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that we will get started. It's 2:05 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you are here for the Navigating the Transitions from Didactic Presentations to Scholarly Publications, then you are in the right place. And if not, you may as well stay right. So, without further ado, I will get started by reading our featured speakers quite impressive and extensive bio. So today joining us, we have Dr. John Paul or JP Sanchez, who is Dean of Universidad Central del Caribe School of Medicine. He is a nationally respected academic physician and leader with distinguished contributions in education, research, clinical care, diversity, equity, inclusion, and community engagement. Formerly the acting vice president of the Office for DEI at the University of New Mexico, Dr. Sanchez has spearheaded initiatives to promote DEI throughout the academic system, focusing on capacity building and sustainable program development. Notably, he played a pivotal role in launching the first formal medical Spanish program at the university's medical school and co-created a health and health sciences wide inclusive excellence council. With 25 years of dedication to diversifying clinical and academic medicine workforces and ensuring educational equity, Dr. Sanchez has received funding from prestigious organizations such as the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation, CDC, HRSA, and NIH. He has authored more than 75 journal articles and book chapters and is an associate editor for MedEd Portal, where he has significantly contributed to advancing DEI curricular content. As executive director of the Latino Medical Student Association, or LAMSA, Dr. Sanchez has worked tirelessly to strengthen a national network of chapters at medical schools across the country, advocating for educational equity for Latinx, Hispanic, or Spanish origin learners. He is also the president of Building the Next Generation of Academic Physicians, dedicated to advancing diversity in academia. A native of the Bronx, of Puerto Rican heritage and gay identified, Dr. Sanchez holds an MPH from the Yale School of Public Health and an MD from Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and he completed his residency in emergency medicine at Jacobi Montefiore Medical Centers. In defined academic trends, just 11 years after residency, he achieved the rank of full professor with tenure, and 13 years after residency, he was selected as a dean of Universidad Central del Caribe School of Medicine in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, and he assumed his role as dean in November of 2023. So as you can see, he's more than qualified to join us today, and I think that I'm sure we're all aware of how timely this talk is, given the current administration's attack and lack of support for work that is focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and regardless of what type of research you do here in emergency medicine, we hope that you find this presentation helpful. So I will see, help you share slides. Let's see, I think maybe Aaron, if you can help us give Dr. Sanchez the ability to share screen as well, and we will get started.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Gibson, for inviting me to be a part of this community. I'm also, I think you mentioned it, a proud graduate of the Jacobi Montefiore Emergency Medicine Program in Bronx, New York, which is a part of Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and have been able to visit your institution, Emory, on several occasions. So I want this to be interactive. I do have a couple of slides to couch our discussion, but as we talk about this topic, I welcome comments in the chat box. Also, as a co-ER physician, I am comfortable with any type of interruption, right? Like we do in the emergency room setting here as well. Please speak out and ask any questions. I probably, like similar to many of you, my major was biology in college. So I wasn't prepared to write either in college, and definitely not prepared to write as a medical student or a resident. It really came more initially as a hobby and also a way of elevating the voice of communities that I've been a part of that I felt were invisible in the literature and in the medical education classroom and resident classroom. So for me, writing and more importantly, publishing was a way of advocacy, giving communities such as the LGBT community, the Latino community, racial and ethnic minoritized communities, women, greater visibility and inclusion in the published literature, which historically has only featured the perspective of men or males. And I think we all come to writing with a different reason or a different purpose. So as we talk about taking our daily activities and translating it into publications, I'm going to be focusing on really my experience with Medit Portal as one vehicle by which for you to publish your work. There's going to be three primary objectives that I'll be covering in this presentation, which is how what we do on a day-to-day basis as teaching faculty, as educators, is a legitimate form of scholarship and publication. Explain how our diverse lived experiences can make it into the published literature and why it's important. And then how Metaportal continues to, like many journals, create a space to publish, dare I say, content related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, this whole idea that we have to be a triple threat to be successful in academia or to be promoted is an outdated concept. Some of you will be able to do it, but you shouldn't have to show excellence in all three areas of academic work, clinical work, teaching, and service to be promoted, right? That's outdated, and that's not going to be the case for most individuals. We do know, however, that it's important to publish. And even when I was a medical student, I remember hearing from faculty that they weren't promoted for a variety of reasons. But one thing that was always said that I'm not sure people realized was that if you didn't have a certain number of publications, you would not move from instructor to assistant to associate professor, associate to full. And so when I was at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, the statement was that in order to be promoted from assistant to associate professor, you needed at least 10 to 12 peer-reviewed publications. And then when I went to Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, it was you needed somewhere between 15 and 20. And then when I went to University of New Mexico, it was a different number. And now at Universidad Central del Caribe, I sort of get to set that bar. But it's important to realize that in all four medical schools that I've been a part of, publishing was, gold. If you published, and the more you published, the more you were able to advance quicker. And I think a lot of people struggle with the question of what do I publish? And is this work that I need to think about, create, and develop at night or on weekends? And so I want you to consider that what you do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's clinical care, being involved with admissions, teaching a variety of concepts, doing faculty affairs or DEI work, anything that you do on behalf of your patients or your learners can be published, right? So that's the first thing. Now, sometimes we think that basic science is the only thing that promotions committees value. And I think that thought process and paradigm has changed. And I thank Dr. Grace Wong, who is the past editor-in-chief of Medit Portal, for really reminding me and others that teaching is a legitimate domain for publishing. Through our teaching work, we discover new approaches, we apply new strategies in different situations, we integrate it in different ways for different learners, and we're valued for the teaching that we do. A lot of time and work goes into planning what we teach, even for a 1-hour workshop. We have to pull together resources. We have to get buy-in typically from either a course director or the dean of education. It takes time to execute. And we're always evaluating our work. And the reason why I mention this is because often faculty will come up to me and say, I don't have any evaluation data to use to support my publication. And I'm like, are you sure about that? Usually whenever you teach for any course, the students are evaluating your workshop or the curriculum. So that data exists someplace. You just have to reach out to the course director or the chair, the dean of education, and they can probably help you access some of that data. And that data, because it's for day-to-day educational purposes, may not require accessing an IRB application to eventually publish it. Many schools now have blanket IRBs that if you are collecting data to improve the teaching that you do day to day, doesn't require an additional IRB application to use and use that data for publication. So when we're thinking about turning teaching into scholarship, it's important to realize that, especially with Medit Portal, but especially with Medit Portal, you want to make sure that your approach to teaching is interactive and that it's not only offered on a local level, which is still valid, but is it generalizable if you were to implement it at a school in another region of the country or across the country? And how is it novel? So many journals want to make sure that it's generalizable and novel for it to be considered scholarship and published. The AAMC has two peer-reviewed journals, Academic Medicine, which many of you are probably familiar with. It's more traditional. It has long original research articles, but also perspectives and brief reports and letters to the editor. But MedIdPortal is quite distinct from academic medicine. And the reason why is because MedIdPortal as a journal focuses on what you have created and giving you publication credit for what you have created and implemented. And yes, you have to provide some evaluation data, but even sharing evaluation data on 50 learners will be sufficient to get it published into MedIdPortal. So we're going to look at some of these examples just so that you get a better idea of how MedIdPortal is a great vehicle by which to publish your teaching materials. MedIdPortal was founded, now I think it's 20 years, to advance specifically the field of medical education and really the role of educators. As mentioned, it's PubMed and Medline indexed. It's free to submit publications and have it accepted for a publication. It's an incredible vehicle, not only to disseminate materials in English, but in other languages, which also makes it a unique journal. And I think when you look at some of the content in MedIdPortal, you'll see that they've made great efforts to ensure inclusion of all topics that we teach within our medical schools, inclusive of UME, GME, faculty affairs, even staff development. And they've even expanded to include materials in teaching in the nursing community, osteopathic medicine, and other communities. As you consider taking your teaching materials and making them into scholarship and publishing in MedIdPortal, you must adhere to certain expectations or requirements. And here I just highlight that, co-authors all have to meet the basic standards of what it means to be a co-author of a manuscript. Typically, a submission has greater success in being accepted if it's not only been implemented once, but twice or three times. And the reason why is because in the discussion section of a MedIdPortal submission, you have to explain how what you created and taught has evolved through multiple implementations. So let's say you created a workshop on how to teach medical students on how to suture. When you did it the first time, and based on the evaluation, did you tweak your workshop in any way to make it a better experience for the students? And then after implementing it a second time, how did you tweak it for the third implementation? And so in the discussion section of what we call the educational summary report, you would explain how you improved upon the workshop through these tweaks, and then also what the students had commented on. The other thing unique about MedIdPortal, and I'm going to show you, is that it's really like all good stuff in a box. So you want to create and share and submit to MedIdPortal all the materials that helped you as a teacher be effective in delivering an exercise or a session so that someone else who does it has comparable success. And something also really unique is that you remain as an owner of anything that you submit to MedIdPortal. You get to retain copyright. So I'll show you an example of this. I published a module on transforming community service work to community service scholarship in MedIdPortal. And then I wrote a book on succeeding in academic medicine. And one of the chapters was a modified version of that submission to MedIdPortal. So some of the considerations, and I sort of already alluded to it in terms of what activities translate readily to MedIdPortal submissions. If you do a 1-hour workshop, that could be a publication. I probably have 20 publications that were 1-hour workshops, in 20 publications in MedIdPortal that are 1-hour workshops that anyone can probably easily implement. So a 1-hour workshop you can submit for publication in MedIdPortal. However, as mentioned, you want to have implemented it at least 3 times or have implemented it to a larger class over 50 or at least 100. You must have active learning elements. It can't just be a talking head like myself right now, and I'll ask the group, what are some active learning elements that you incorporate in your teaching and that might elevate your submission to Medit Portal? Can anyone unmute or share in the chat box? So there was a question in the chat box, is IRB approval required for submissions with Medit Portal? Yes. However, if you collect data anonymously, if your teaching activity is for educational purposes, usually your IRB will give you an exempt status, which is sufficient. You just submit that exempt letter to Medit Portal when you submit your module. Role play, absolutely. So role playing, reflection exercises, video-based discussion, case scenarios, games, those are all ways to make something active learning. And every submission must have learning objectives. I've started with 3 learning objectives. Any submission to Medit Portal must have a reasonable number of learning objectives, well written and brief. I see Claudine mentioned I've had them build DIY low fidelity trainers with me so they learn how to do it themselves. Can you write out DIY? What is DIY? Oh, do it yourself. Okay. That might be a great part of the title, right? Do it yourself blank. So I like that. For all, as you're thinking about what to submit to Medit Portal, the website has templates that you can use to help guide you in your writing, and so that you have a clear understanding of how to format your content to have the greatest success in being accepted into Medit Portal. And I'll show you some of those templates. Submissions to Medit Portal that don't go so well, and hence why you see that little X on the side, passive lectures, or talking heads, things that have already been published on. So any good submission to Medit Portal, you need to explain in the introduction what currently exists in Medit Portal and how you're filling a gap. How you're filling a gap, how what you've created is unique and different and does not exist in Medit Portal, and that's why it is novel. Beyond passive lectures, one-time symposia tend to be frowned upon because it may not be really reproducible across schools. And longitudinal courses don't tend to fare very well. I'll ask you, why do you think longitudinal courses of like 6 to 8 months don't fare well as a submission to Medit Portal? There's 2 reasons. Answer is on the screen to some extent, but I want to hear someone explain it. Anyone? Well, a 6 to 8 month course implemented, for example, I'm just going to use Katrina, your school at Emory. There may not be time for the people to properly manage it someplace else, right? Imagine going to your dean of medical education and saying, oh, I need 6 months of 2 hours per week for 6 months to do, my program. The dean of medical education is going to look at you and be like, no, right? Because there's so much other material and content to provide to the students to comply with LCME and other standards that it just doesn't make it practical. So it's better to start with even a workshop of that 6-month training. And then if someone's interested in other sessions as a part of that curriculum, they could always contact you. Let's see what someone said. Too few people attending. Sometimes too few people attending, but it's actually more so the length of time and how much time within the curriculum you would need from the institution. So I sort of alluded to this. Medit Portal has created a broad space for a lot of material to be submitted for consideration. You could submit content around interprofessional education, DEI, dental, nursing. We have specific collections right now around opioids, addiction and pain management, telehealth communication, anti-racism, and one of our new ones is language appropriate healthcare and medical languages, which really has created a space for people to publish in Mandarin, Spanish, and other languages. The journal, as you think about translating your work into scholarship, if you're not sure who to turn to at your own institution, some of the people that you can consider is reaching out to the faculty mentors of the mentoring program through Medit Portal, which I think is something really unique. So Dr. Akinola and Dr. Kreutzer are co-directors, and you can reach out to them as well as to me or any of the associate editors as you're thinking about how to package your teaching materials into a Medit Portal submission. They do have office hours, but more importantly, they provide one-on-one advising. So don't feel like, you may not be successful because no one's at your institution. Both of these individuals are accessible. So, I always laugh. This is a slide set that Meta Portal shares with me, but I got the privilege of starting the DI collection. I think it's been now 7 or 8 years ago, and it continues to be in place. As you know, the current executive orders have not put restrictions on how we teach materials and the teaching materials that we use. The executive orders have really focused more on policies and the names of offices and so forth. And so as you continue to create and implement DI teaching activities, know that you can work to publish it in Medit Portal. This is just some contextual data that I like to share that I sort of alluded to in the beginning, that when we think about disparities in promotion, people who have done DI work have typically been of lived experience of Black, Native American, Latino, LGBT, minoritized, or marginalized. And the literature has shown that these individuals also, especially racial and ethnic minorities, it takes them longer to be promoted from assistant to associate or associate to full. So part of this promotion disparity has been historically a lack of opportunities to publish the work that we were engaged in. But now, through journals like Medit Portal and other journals who are creating spaces for DEI content, hopefully that will help address these disparities. But we got to write, and we got to write to publish. Some examples that I have been able to take as teaching and publish them in Medit Portal are the following. I got to work with medical students to publish a module titled The Case of Ty Jackson, an interactive module on LGBT health employing introspective techniques and radio-based discussion. And what was great about this publication is that the students at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School had complained that no one was teaching them how to provide quality, safe care for LGBT patients. And for the most part, a lot of the faculty were uncomfortable in creating materials or teaching it because they had never been taught when they were going to medical school. So, similar to everyone on this call, I worked with medical students. We created videos of good and bad patient-physician encounters. And then we created narrative guides to help individuals as they're watching the videos understand what was done well and what was done poorly in communicating with these patients. So video-based discussion would be considered an interactive teaching modality rather than something passive like a lecture. The other great thing about it is up until this point, there wasn't a lot of material tied to LGBT health equity. And so the journal, in essence, helped to validate this material by putting it out there as a peer-reviewed publication. Publishing also helps facilitate identity formation. To be completely honest, this is one of my college friends who I got to work with. She is a gastroenterologist. She was the fellowship director at NYU. And while she was doing a master's of education, Dr. Williams said, "Hey, wow, I wish I had received the material that I'm learning in my master's of education during medical school. Let me take some of those materials and rework it and create some modules for medical students and publish it." So one of the first ones she did was introducing trainees to medical education activities and opportunities for educational scholarship. And while she was developing or receiving her master's of education, it's just another example of how she was teaching medical students. The other unique feature about Medit Portal that I wanted to highlight is that it allows you a great way to bring visibility to role models, advisors, and mentors. I like this slide because often students will say, there's no one like me, or there's no one with similar lived experiences, or there's no one who looks like me in my faculty. And one of the great things about Medit Portal is you can add as many videos and photos as you would like, displaying the great diversity that exists within academia across, the 220 medical schools. So in this module titled Introducing Trainees to Academic Medicine Career Roles and Responsibilities, I featured 3 individuals who hold faculty tracks of all within the LHS Plus community, but doing different things. Like Dr. Perez is a clinician researcher. Dr. Fernandez is also a clinician researcher, but also does education. Dr. Salzado is a primary clinical faculty as a way of inspiring medical students and residents to consider faculty careers. So I'm just going to highlight one other thing to keep in mind as you think about what teaching activities you could publish on. Remember that you attend many professional development conferences on the local, regional, and national level. And when you do these presentations, you're presenting to peers or medical students and residents, and you can also collect evaluation data. And you could take all that information and publish it in Medic Portal. I attend a lot of conferences, not only of the AAMC, but of identity-based organizations, the Student National Medical Association, the Latino Medical Student Association, NMA, NHMA, APAMSA, ANAMS. I could go on and on. But as you present at these conferences, that is material you could also publish in Medit Portal. So back in 2018, 2019, I worked with students on a workshop for Hispanic Heritage Month titled Taking Care of the Puerto Rican Patient, Identity, Health Disparities, and Access to Care. And we offered it at 7 different medical schools as a part of their Hispanic Heritage Month activities, and each of the schools agreed to do it. We then collected the data and submitted the workshop as posters for conferences. We then used the data to submit to Medit Portal. And now chapters of LMSA and SNMA incorporate this in their community teaching or presenting in certain communities as a part of community education. And so I share this as just a way of optimizing scholarship and as an example of how you can take what you do day to day and transform it into a publication. And I often, in a larger discussion at times, I ask people, is this minority taxation or is this building minority capital? We've rephrased it to diversity capital. And I believe it's building diversity capital because you're not only serving a community that's important to you, but you're also generating publications, which, as I mentioned in the beginning, increases your chances and often is a requirement to getting promoted. So in this module, here's just an example of some of the slides. We talk about tradition and genetics and how tradition influenced Puerto Rican health and cuisine. For example, the contribution of Taino identity or indigenous identity introduced yuca and corn and barbecuing into Puerto Rican cuisine. African tradition and culture introduced plantains for one of our native dishes, mofongo. The Spanish introduced pork and American influence of pizza and hamburgers, which I won't go further into. But this is just an example of how even your lived experiences or your heritage can help inform a publication that gets submitted and published in Medit Portal. And it doesn't have to stop just with taking care of the Puerto Rican patient. There could be a module on every Spanish speaking or every country of the Spanish speaking diaspora, or a module for every country of the African diaspora, Asian diaspora, European diaspora, right? So subsequent to this module, there was a module by one of my mentees on taking care of the Haitian American patient. And so as we hear about, attacks on DI and related work, it's important to know historically that this isn't a new phenomena. Our medical schools, for a long period of time, since the beginning of time, struggled with creating a space to share teaching around the lived experiences, the unique healthcare needs, and health disparities of minoritized communities. And that's why organizations like ANAMS and NMA and SNMA and LMSA and APAMS that came about to create safe spaces for these discussions and best practices could be shared. So I think, even in this climate, it's important to realize that these organizations still do exist and are doing great work. Medit Portal does exist and creates a space for you to publish this type of work and other materials. And right now within our medical schools, this type of teaching is still protected over that. The other great thing about publishing is that you get to choose who your co-authors are. So I love sharing this slide because this is the academic medicine community that I surround myself with. colleagues of different lived experiences and perspectives from across the country through a form of networking, but they've all been co-authors. And so it's not only for promotion potential, but it's also to create a community of support for yourself that's positive, reaffirming, and safe. I sort of mentioned before that you still own materials that you publish in Medit Portal. I've in the second box right here, as you can see, there's a curriculum that I worked on with the colleagues that you saw in the prior slide that focused on helping medical students, residents, and fellows think about becoming future faculty. And it started off as a professional development training that occurred over a day or a day and a half of 12 interactive workshops. We took that curriculum, we partitioned it into 12 Medit Portal modules, which we published all 12 within Medit Portal. And then we took the same materials, modified it slightly, and published it in a book in Springer, Succeeding in Academic Medicine, a roadmap for diverse medical students and residents. So this is just another example of taking teaching and making it into 2 to 3 publications or more through Medit Portal submissions, through a book, or even through other journals. And now there's other curriculum that I'm working on to have a similar outcome. This is just to highlight some of the success that my own students and colleagues have had in moving DI forward within the journal. Dr. Andrea Garcia was the past president of ANAMS, and she created this exemplary publication in Medit Portal titled The Social and Structural Determinants of Urban American Indian Alaska Native Health, a case study in Los Angeles that received the Editor's Choice Award as a publication in Medit Portal. Dr. Guzman, Dr. Spencer, Dr. Katari, Dr. Almanzar have all been medical students and residents who I've worked with and have published each individually several publications in Medit Portal. And Deborah Silva, who is my fellow dean in Puerto Rico, she is the dean at UPR School of Medicine, and Dr. Ortega, who's faculty at Pritzker and is founder of MOLA, oversee the language equity collection of Medit Portal. So just highlighting just some examples of the successes that individuals have had and can have, either as a co-author in a manuscript or if you aspire to be co-editor of a collection. So based on, the work that I've been doing, I like to highlight areas around DI that exist now in Medit Portal. I sort of alluded to publications around the unique health issues and health disparities of different communities, service learning, medical Spanish, anti-racism. But as you look in the journal, realize that there are many opportunities to publish on clinical skills, communication, reading EKGs, suturing, and so forth. It's really endless, all the content that is in Medit Portal. That was my last slide. I am going to just stop here because I want to take you to the journal and show you 2 important pages on the journal as you consider transforming your teaching into Medit Portal publications. But while I'm pulling this up, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I had a question. You kind of alluded to this earlier. I think one of the things that's really important to us, particularly in the DI space, is making sure that we're facilitating mentorship and getting diverse learners and residents involved. Have there been any specific challenges that you have faced with attempting to kind of like corral people who are like junior faculty, med students, or learners into kind of getting them more actively involved in ways that maybe like some pitfalls as to kind of how to, I guess, maybe kind of delegate and successfully make sure that they're involved in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like building any team. And so you got to think about what do you need for this team to be successful? Sometimes people only want to surround themselves with co-authors that have multiple publications, but they also tend to be very busy. And some people don't like to take on medical students because they say, well, what does a medical student know? So as you build your team and you delegate responsibilities, you have to think about, why are you bringing on this person? What is the skill and proficiency that they're bringing on? and then, limit their responsibilities to that, help them grow a little, but don't expect them to go beyond their competency level that is going to set them up for failure. Really think about setting them up for success. So when I think about working with a medical student, I give them, very specific instructions. I'm going to need you for about 20 hours. You're going to spend 5 hours to do a lit search, pull those documents, create a folder, share that folder with me, sit down. You're going to spend another 5 hours reading those papers, writing a paragraph in the introduction to this question, specifically around, the health of Puerto Rican patients. What exists in MedPortal on Latino health? So write out, summarize the articles that you found and write that in a paragraph, right? So you have to give very specific details so that you're setting people up for success. Once they've achieved success, they're going to feel more confident to take on maybe something that's a little bit more difficult. I think where people struggle is sometimes they build teams, they don't spend the time explaining who's responsible for what, following up with people, and being reasonable in expectations. So I think that's just really important to keep in mind. And also beyond the co-authors, when you create materials in MedPortal, if you're creating videos and you've never created or edited a video, you need to go to your Office of Communications and see who they can identify to help you create and edit and package the video. Same thing with audio recordings. Always seek out individuals within the institution who have the technical aspects that can join your team rather than traditional co-authors. Sometimes you don't need everyone to write, but you need them to manage other things like statistics. Does that help?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So I encourage everyone to go to MedPortal so we can look at this together. It's just www.meditportal.org. I'm kind of smiling right now because I got to support Alec Kalak, who is the past president of ANAMS, in this submission and publication and introduction to traditional healing in American Indian and Alaska Native communities. So, congratulations to Alec. I also am co-author on this submission, Diseases Transmitted by Arthropods, modules to train medical providers in English and Spanish. So two of the featured publications right now are publications that I got to work with individuals on. But the reason why I'm taking you to this webpage is that there's this great like submissions instruction section, author center, and author development. And when you go to submission instructions, there's a set of useful information. I'm going to have you look at educational summary report because this area right here gives you templates for your educational summary report when you submit to MedPortal. So the educational summary report is something that needs to be completed on anything submitted to MedPortal. It is your root document. It looks like a traditional journal article, and I'm just going to share this again. And so this has been created to help you avoid gaps or errors when you're submitting something to MedPortal. I'll give you a very simple example. They tell you use this space to write the title, limit it to 18 words, and they actually tell you how to write a title. Use a descriptive title that accurately reflects the educational innovation. Then they say, don't forget to list all your authors, and they tell you how to feature the co-authors. They also explain to you how to create educational objectives, an abstract, and the content of the ESR. If you follow this as a template and fully answer every question, you will avoid certain major errors and gaps. And so they're developing this to help you be successful in your journey to publishing in MedPortal. So whenever I sit with someone who's seeking mentorship, I ask them to complete this fully and gather all their teaching materials like their PowerPoint, their discussion guide, their data, and present it to me so we can have a discussion of how to help them be successful in submitting to MedPortal. So I just wanted to share that as what I consider the central resource that MedPortal provides to guide you in developing and transforming your teaching materials into scholarship and a publication. I'm going to stop here and see if anyone has any questions based on what I shared about MedPortal or scholarship broadly. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you all today.
Feel free to put any questions in the chat or just come off of mute if there's anything that maybe we didn't address or you'd like to elaborate on a little bit further, please let us know.
So who's the first person on this call that's going to submit to Medit Portal? And what are you submitting? So I could be on the lookout for it.
I have a question. I know you mentioned that the new executive orders tend to, just kind of focus more so on policies, name changes, but not necessarily the education piece. I'm just wondering, do you anticipate or have you run into yet some of the executive orders possibly impacting the type of data and information that's available, particularly like there's sometimes, we're not allowed to mention, demographics when we're surveying our learners and things like that. Has that been a barrier as of yet?
Well, I think there's two approaches, right? There's the history of the movement, which you could
Mhm.
always comment on and document. And then there's moving forward, what data is going to exist. I think, yeah, it's going to be harder maybe to provide some updated statistics. But when we think about applicants, matriculation, graduation for faculty are, so our learners, residents, and faculty, ACGME and AMC and AN are still supportive of collecting that information. So I think we'll still have those data variables. When it comes to patient-related data, I think people are going to have to search differently. One document that I like using are community health assessments that all hospitals have to conduct to best serve the patients in their catchment area. So even if you can't find great data from the city or the state health department, always try to tap the community health assessments conducted by your hospital, whichever hospital you're at. And so you're absolutely right. Some of the data sources are going to be harder to find, but not impossible. For a lot of the Meta Portal publications, people are still asking learners their demographic information. So there have been no restrictions on the evaluation side of characterizing your learners. When you collect evaluation data, you must at least 50 to 75% of your learners have to be within the medical profession, either as medical students, residents, fellows, faculty, physicians. You cannot have pre-meds. You cannot submit content for college learners. So the journal focuses on medical school or higher in terms of published teaching materials.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your expertise. I know that this is helpful for many of us, particularly in this space as a conference season is approaching. So I expect that you'll see plenty of submissions from SAEM 25, and hopefully some of us will make this cut and be able to share our expertise, modules, and information with MedPortal and other institutions. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with us. We greatly appreciate it. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.